منها القرآن المعجز الذي بهر إعجازه كل العقول وقهر. First among them is the miraculous Quran, the nature of which overwhelms. Due to its incapacitating eloquence and meanings, all the intellects that examine it are conquered by. Now, unfortunately, for most people, this miracle is simply not accessible. The Arabs at the time the Quran was revealed had been prepared for the Quran. There's anybody that looks at this has to marvel at the timing of the Quran, because the Quran comes at a time when the bulagha, these eloquent masters of Arabic, and the ability, nobody, if you read Jahili poetry, nobody in the history of the Arabic language was more adept at descriptive language, at just perfect language to describe something. So when they described the desert sands, they gave descriptions that you cannot improve on. They had a rhetorical prowess that was unmatched in the history of the Arabic language. In the same way that one could argue that English reached its pinnacle during the time of the Elizabethan period. And nobody has come up with poetry that is the equivalent of Donne or Shakespeare or a little bit later Milton, his period. But that period of the English language is unparalleled. The next closest thing is probably some of the 19th century writers. But English now has fallen on hard times. And there just aren't very many eloquent writers anymore in English. And what passes for great writing is quite extraordinary. So if you look at English literature, you will see that every great language has a period of time when it just reaches its culminating apex. Persian language is like that, with the great Persian poets who are also around the same time. The Greek language during the period of Homer, and then also later to a certain degree during Plato's period. So the Arabs, this language had reached this pinnacle, and what's fascinating is almost all of the Jahili poets die right before Islam comes. And then there's nobody to parallel them after Islam. There's great poets, Abu Nuwas and Ibn Burda and Al-Mutanabbi. I mean, there's great poets, but none of them can compare to Imr al-Qais or Labid or Nabigha al-Dhibyani. None of them. So when the Quran came down and the Arabs heard it, these were people that were speaking in their normal language, the language that they obtained from their mothers. And all you have to do is read the Arab, the A'rab, the Bedouins who relate hadith. Just anybody who studied Arabic, for you who study Arabic, look at the hadith of Halima Sa'diyah. Look at the way she speaks. Look at the hadith of Aisha bint Abi Bakr. Look at the hadith of Zara'. Look at some of Aisha's khutab. Aisha knew all of the Jahili poetry by rote. Muawiyah once asked one of his boon companions, Nadim, who's the most eloquent person you've ever heard? He said, Wallahi anta ya Amir al-Mu'mineen. You know, you are. And he was very eloquent. And he said, I want you to be honest with me. He said, well, in that case, he said, I've never heard anybody more eloquent than Aisha, the daughter of a Siddiq. And if you look at Aisha's speeches, they're stunning expressions of the Arabic language. These people could do this naturally. There was no takalluf in their speech. They didn't have to sit down and write speeches and work out rhetorical artifices and tropes and figures, to impress people. All of that came later. When they examined their language, they said, oh, this is called antithesis. This is called, tibaq. This is jinas. Here's alliteration. They came later. They were doing this naturally. They didn't need to study rhetoric to learn how to do these things. They got them from their mother tongue. So when these people first heard the Quran, they were overwhelmed by it. First of all, they said, this is not the speech. This is not something we've heard before. They had 3 types of language. They had nathar, which is prose. They had saj'a, which is almost like what we call today rap. It's not poetry, but it's using a lot of rhyme, and the Arabs liked it in their khutab. The kahinas used to use it. These soothsayers used to do it, and it almost sounds a little bit, subterranean homesick blues. It just sounds a little bit like somebody's just trying a little too hard. But and then the third was shi'r. And then shi'r had what were called abhur, which are the bahar, the meters. And they had, their meters were qualitative, they were of time duration, and the Arabs could do this naturally. And this is why you have Arab poets that could just say a poem without any difficulty, completely spontaneous. Many, many examples of this. And Shaykh Abdullah bin Bayya is very, very capable of doing that. He can say something in meter. Just like people that really master Shakespeare have no difficulty extemporaneously speaking in iambic pentameter, which is a natural form of speech, but it's only one bahar. These people could do many, many of these meters. So the Arabs, when they heard the Quran, they said, this is a sahir. And the reason they said he was a magician was because they saw the effect it was having. It was like a magic on people. People were becoming mesmerized by it. Even people that weren't interested. The Quraysh, at one point, they were giving people cotton to put into their ears when they went into the haram, because they did not want people to hear the Quran, because they knew they'd get influenced. And some of these people would go in and they'd just take it out to listen, because curiosity killed the cat. So they would do that, and people became Muslim that way. وَمِنَ النَّاسِ مَنْ يَشْهَرِ لَهْوَ الْحَدِيثِ لِيُضِلَّ عَنْ سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ. Amongst the people are those who purchase empty, vain talk. When they used to go listen to the Prophet, one of the Quraysh got some Persian storytellers that used to tell the stories of the Persian kings, to sit on the road to try to distract people, to give them stories about things. So they were very worried about the impact that this was having on them. Even Al-Walid ibn Mughira, who was the father of Khalid, Al-Walid was one of the most eloquent of the Quraysh, and when he heard the Quran, he was overwhelmed by it. And he said that this Quran is just something very, very captivating. And it was Abu Jahl convinced him, his magic's getting to you. But he almost became Muslim just from hearing the Quran. فَاصْدَعْ بِمَا تُؤْمَرْ. When one of the Arabs came into the haram, he heard the Prophet ﷺ reciting some verses, and he went into sajda. And somebody said, did you become Muslim? He said, no, but I was compelled by the eloquence of that language just to do that. So this is the effect that this was having on them. And that's what the Prophet ﷺ generally would do. When people would come in and he would recite Quran to them. That's what he would do. Because that was the power that Allah had given him, was in the message, in form and content. Form and content. You can have content without form, and you can have form without content. The West has mastered form without content. So people will go and watch a 2-hour film and pay a lot of money, and there's nothing there. But the form is so magical. Really, the form is so magical that people will sit mesmerized watching, cars blow up because it's the form, but there's nothing there. It's empty, meaningless. And then you can have extraordinary content but poorly produced, which is another tragedy, because people tend to not be interested. If you see a book, I'll give you some really beautiful books published in Pakistan, and it's so hard to read them because the typesetting is all words. But if they were produced really well, they're really quite extraordinary books. Some of these books that were written by some of these 19th and early 20th century scholars in Pakistan who really knew English quite well. It's a little bit Victorian, but they're really quite extraordinary books. But they're hard to read for somebody who wants to have nice content. So form and content is what is so masterful about the Quran and the impact that it has. So Qadi Iyad says about the i'jaz al-Quran that there are many types of i'jaz in the Quran, and he says there are four major areas, but one thing is the husnu ta'lif والتئام كلمه وفصاحته ووجوه إيجازه. It's the way that it's put together, the syntactical structures of the actual sentences. One of the things Abu Bakr al-Baqallani did in his book called I'jaz al-Quran is he took the Jahili poets, the great masters of poetry, and he showed how all of the Jahili poets have bad lines. There's no Jahili poet that did not have what's called shi'r raqiq, just poorly constructed shi'r, poetry. But he challenged anyone to find a rhetorically weak verse in the Quran. In other words, a verse that could actually be articulated in a better way than it's articulated in the Quran with the Arabic language. That is something stunning. Now, because I'm an editor, and people that do editing, I often read things and I think, I would have said it differently, or, I'll edit while I'm reading things. Modern Arab writing is really hard for me to read because I've spent most of my life reading classical writers who have just such a mastery of the language that it's hard to imagine that you could improve on their language. So that's the thing about the highest level of editing gets to the point where you just can't improve on it. It would be hard to improve on it. But in any book that's ever been written, you will find things that can be improved on. It doesn't matter. Shakespeare, anybody. Shakespeare has doggerel in his plays. So Abu Bakr al-Baqallani shows that the Quran does not have any rhetorically weak language. It's just if you take the science of rhetoric, which is a science, and analyze the Quran, you won't come any. So and then ilti'amu kalimihi, the appropriate, one of the things about language, and this is why people enjoy listening to eloquent people, because when you hear really eloquent language, it's more than just listening to the language for meaning, but you actually enjoy hearing the types of words that are put together when there's real mastery of speaking. And so even the letters that are used, have meaning. I'll give you some examples. In the Arabic language, the word khafif, and thaqil, سَنُلْقِي عَلَيْكَ قَوْلًا ثَقِيلًا. Qaf is one of the heaviest words in the Quran. Qaf. Al-Quran. Qaf يدل على الالتصاق, يدل على the qaf is usually used in words يدل على انتهاء or قطع or قعر. The depths of something, the severing of something. It's a very strong word, which is why qata'a is a qaf, qata'a, qadhafa, qattara. I mean, many, many examples of that. So the word thaqil, tha is a heavy word. Tha, qa, thaqil, it's heavy. Then nulqi, alayka, qawlan, thaqilan. It's actually heavy. So we will thrust upon you a weighty word. So even the choice of the letters in the Quran have meanings. It's something really amazing about the Quran. There are many, many examples of that in the Quran. قُطُوفُهَا دَانِيَةٌ. قُطُوفُهَا قَطَفَ, to pick something, to pull it off. قَا. قُطُوفُهَا دَانِيَةٌ. Daniya, dunu is close. قُطُوفُهَا, qataf is usually difficult. And then daniya, it's something that's close to you. قُطُوفُهَا دَانِيَةٌ. Dunya, what's right, the closest thing to you. Dunu. Also, the muqatta'at, these mystical letters that if you look, somebody took all of the letters of the Quran that are mentioned and tried to assemble like a meaningful sentence from these letters, the muqatta'at, alif lam mim, hamim ain sin qaf, alif lam mim ra. And the only sentence, this is one of the Mufassirin, the only sentence that he could come up with was Nassun Hakimun Qati'un Lahu Sir. Nassun Hakimun Qati'un Lahu Sir. That was the only, and that has all the muqatta'at. Nassun Hakimun Qati'un Lahu Sir. A wise nas is nas al-Quran, a wise revelation. Qati'un, absolute. Lahu Sir, it has a secret. That was the only one he could come up with. So even the muqatta'at, if you look at the muqatta'at, they're very strange. Who could think of that? To start a book with letters that nobody knows what they mean. Alif lam mim, ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابِ لِلتَّعْظِيم. That book, ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابِ لِلتَّعْظِيم. لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ. There's no doubt in it. That's the beginning of the book. Alif lam mim, you don't know what this means. So the first thing is, if you're coming to this book with some preconceptions about this book, with your own intellect, which is going to determine what you accept and what you reject, you're not going to get anything. Hudal lil muttaqin. This is guidance for people that are already aware of some type of sense of duty towards their Lord. It's not going to benefit you. If you go to the book with your arrogance, if you go to the book thinking that you know everything, this book's not going to give you anything. Alif lam mim. Nobody knows what that means. All the mufassirun say, Allahu Ta'ala a'lam. God knows what it means. One of the things that we do know is that letters in English, in modern linguistics, phonemes are meaningless. Phonemes. They're meaningless. We don't believe that. We believe that even letters have meaning. We just don't know what they mean. But we believe they have meaning. In other words, it's meaning all the way down. All the way down to the phonemes. And the first language, which was probably called Syrianiya, was a language of just phonemes put together. Like ba, boo, boo, ga, ga, which is why babies speak in those, the initial, which is called doubling. In linguistics, this is the thing humans can do that animals can't do. We can put phonemes together and make words. And we do this out of 28, approximately. I mean, some languages have less than 28 and some have more, but there's not more than, I think it's like 45 or something sounds in any given language. From these 28 letters, look what we can talk about. 28 letters. And look what we can articulate. We can talk about infinity. Infinity. Humans can conceptualize things that are even beyond our limited intellect's capacity to experience, and yet we can conceptualize them. And the highest of that is the greatest non-conceptualization, which is divinity. The fact that we can conceive of God, of that which is out of time and space, but is the creator of time and space, that has no form, that is pure consciousness, that has all knowledge, omniscient, omnivolent, omnipotent, that we can conceive of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a miracle, and we conceive of God through language, because without language we have no thought. Without language we have no thought. So all of these things come together in the Quran, all of these extraordinary gifts of language. If you look, Ar-Rahman خلق الإنسان علم القرآن خلق الإنسان علمه البيان الرحمن علم القرآن. Ar-Rahman, the merciful, imprinted the Quran. Allama in Arabic, the original meaning of that was to imprint into sand or clay, to leave a alama. Now, the first writing was piercing into clay, right? The cuneiform writing. And this is what Allah has done with the human being. We've imprinted in us, this is what Chomsky understood, that there is a universal grammar, that human beings, it is imprinted in us to learn language, that language is something that is intrinsic to our very humanity, that language is part of us, it's encoded in us. And this is why wherever you grow up, you will learn the language of those people. If they're Chinese and you're from Brooklyn and you're raised in a Chinese family, you're going to speak Chinese. If you're a Chinese person and they raise you in Brooklyn, you're going to end up having a horrible American accent. No, I'm sorry. All the Brooklynese people, apologies. But this is the reality, that we have the ability to learn language. It's imprinted. علم القرآن خلق الإنسان, created the human being. علمه البيان, imprinted in the human being was the ability to understand language. Quran and insan. Quran and insan. And between these two is the messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He's the one that gave the Quran to humanity. Revelation, the receiver of the revelation, and then that receiver. This is communication. This is exactly how communication works. And so the Prophet ﷺ articulated this extraordinary book, the fasaha of the book, the fact that the letters have been preserved to the degree that they've been preserved. We know exactly how the Quran is recited. We know how the Prophet ﷺ recited it. We know how many beats on every letter. How? This is the preservation of this book. No other book has this preservation. Inna nahnu nazzalna dhikra wa inna lahu lahafidhun. We have sent down this book and we have taken upon ourselves to preserve the book. If you go now to that matba' in Medina, subhanallah, look at what the preservation of this Quran. Every Quran that you pick up in that masjid, all those hundreds of thousands of masahif are exactly the same, with no mistakes. That this has been going on for centuries. Imam al-Qurtubi, about this verse, if you look in his tafsir, a Christian man came in Andalusia and he copied out a Bible and put mistakes in it on purpose. And he went to this Christian, and he was a calligrapher, master calligrapher, and it was a beautiful illuminated Bible. And he showed the Christian, and he said, could you read this and tell me if it's good? And this was the great scholar of the, and he read it, and he said, it's a beautiful gospel. And then he did the same with the Torah. He went to a Jew. It's beautiful. And he said, you didn't see anything wrong with it? No, it's beautiful. And then he wrote a mushaf and put mistakes in there. He took it to the Muslim scholar and he said, could you read this and tell me what you think? and he said, we need to burn this. He said, why? He said, there's mistakes in it. And he knew, that Imam al-Qurtubi mentions this in his tafsir. He knew that it was preserved. No other religious book has been given the blessing of preservation that this book has been given. That is i'jaz, that the Quran says this book will be preserved. Tajweed. We know the makharij al-huruf. We know the 17 points of articulation. I know exactly where the qa emanates from. I know where the ha emanates from. I know where the lam emanates from. I know the attributes of these. We know what's ismat, we know what is mahmusa, we know the idlaq, we know the huruf, the qalqala. We know these things. I know if you say al-haqq, that you have qalqala. We know the kubra and the sughra. Why? How did this all get preserved? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promised to preserve it. He promised His Prophet this book would be preserved. This is a miracle alone, just the preservation of the Quran. And Muslims have really, unfortunately, a lot of them, they just don't understand the incredible gift this community has been given in the having a unified book and the preservation that the book has been given. So he mentions that, the fasaha of the book. Ijazuhu, the Quran, it's walakum fil qisasi haya. The Quran says with a few words what needs to be articulated in entire books. The commentaries of the few words of the Quran needs to be articulated, needs to be explained in entire books. A whole book can be written just on that one idea in the Quran. Many examples of that in the Quran. If you look at Al-Fatiha, iltifat. In the Quran you have what's called iltifat, which is a rhetorical device in which you move from first person to second person to third person. This bedazzles Western people. They have a hard time, or rather befuddles them. They have a hard time reading the Quran because they say, "Ooh, wait a second, it just said you and now it's saying me and then it said I and what." They can't see that. This is a rhetorical device used in the Arabian language. And it's almost like a Zen koan to maintain concentration in people, but also it has secrets. Ibn Juzay al-Kalbi said, the Quran, if you look at the iltifat in Al-Fatiha, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala begins, when you begin Fatiha, according to Maliki, it's Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. It's in the hadith in Al-Bukhari, قَسَمْتُ بَيْنِي وَبَيْنَ عَبْدِي الْفَاتِحَةِ or فَاتِحَةَ الْكِتَابِ فَإِذَا قَالَ عَبْدِي الْحَمْدُ لِلَّهِ رَبِّ الْعَالَمِينَ. That's how the hadith Qudsi begins the Fatiha. Allahu Akbar, Alhamdu Lillahi Rabbil Alameen, Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, Maliki Yawmiddin. That's all called, it's the ghaib. It's Allah, the Merciful, the Compassionate, Master of the Day of Judgment. That's all in the ghaiba. It's third person way of speaking. And then Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in. That now you move to direct khitaba. So now you're in the khitab. So you move to second person. Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in. Then you move Ihdina siratal mustaqim. First person. Ihdina. Right? Guide us to the straight path. Ihdina. So he said that is the movement of Fatiha. When you enter into the prayer, your presence is not it's not complete. But as you move in to the discourse with your Lord, the presence becomes stronger. You get to Iyyaka na'budu. Now you're directly speaking to God. Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in. To you, you're speaking directly to God. You begin by speaking as if God is absent, and you end by speaking directly to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. These are the ways in which the Quran reveals itself, the masterful way in which the Quran is a vehicle for consciousness, for awareness of the divine.